I struggled with this tension, and in the end, I just felt that I should have said something a week earlier about some of the qualities that Jason Arday had brought to my sister's research, that maybe the pylon had gone too far, to take account of the fact that this is quite a vulnerable person who, even if he did wrong, it did feel a bit disproportionate. And he may be, do you see what I'm saying? He may be near the edge.
I want to talk to you about your column in the Times this weekend in response to the death of the former Cambridge professor Jason Arday. You, as you wrote, you hold yourself, you sort of hold yourself partly responsible. You feel you failed him. Explain to us why.
My sister, Rebecca, a great person, she texted me just before it blew up. And she is a psychiatrist, Oxford educated, conducts research, has done around the world. And some of her research in the last couple of years has been with somebody called Jason Arday. I'd never heard of this person when she sent her WhatsApp message over. And she showed me the right-wing race realist who was trying to go after Arday. And she felt that this was unfair because she said he's a very bright, articulate, slightly unpredictable in some ways, academic, but brings great creativity to the research they were doing, which is working with young, vulnerable people to access mental health treatment. So I started looking at it, and then it blows up. But of course, as I'm looking at it, I'm seeing that there are allegations of plagiarism, that the investigation into whether he had plagiarised may not have been as robust as it could have been, other allegations of inventing data, which is obviously not something you should do as a scholar. And so we had this long back and forth about whether some of this criticism was legitimate, and I think it was legitimate. And of course, this was going back and forth. And I did write a column, I guess, last week about this, saying that, in some circumstances, diversity can be a very good thing. I'm a beneficiary of it, Hugo. I would never have got into Oxford unless I'd thought, this is a slightly unusual kid from a comp background who left school at 16, played a bit of ping pong, but he seems, reasonably bright. We're going to go for the riskier rather than the safer option. Probably getting into this newspaper as a freelancer 20 years ago. They thought, let's give him So I think we need to broaden intake in journalism, more people from the working classes, because there's a huge amount of talent out there. So I do feel that there is an agenda there, but that possibly this person, Arday, probably, certainly wasn't the right person, that DEI, I think, did go too far, got attached to woke ideology. So I struggled with this tension, and in the end, I just felt that I should have said something a week earlier about some of the qualities that Jason Arday had brought to my sister's research, that maybe the pylon had gone too far, to take account of the fact that this is quite a vulnerable person who, even if he did wrong, it did feel a bit disproportionate. And he may be, do you see what I'm saying? He may be near the edge.
I see exactly what you're saying. And I asked this question genuinely as a question, but as a journalist, and bear in mind, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just asking the question, why is that your responsibility? Why is it your responsibility to be concerned about the mental health of the person you're writing about in a completely legitimate story? I'm not saying it's not your responsibility. I'm saying, as journalists, we all have to ask ourselves that question. How and why is that our responsibility?
So I think there's perhaps two different things. One is whether the story is legitimate, point one. Point two is whether the scrutiny has been excessive.
Yep.
So you can imagine, if you have done something wrong, like you've stolen a bottle of water from a colleague, you should be told...
I got that out of the machine, I swear I paid for that.
I accept that.
Yep.
But I think you would be right to be told off.
Yep.
If you were then on the front page of the papers for the next year, your whole life deconstructed, your children in the fire, and all the rest of it, then I think that's probably just...
Whose individual responsibility is that? Because your column was perfectly reasonable. Why does your column have to be considered in the context of front pages and completely different newspapers?
I was chatting to Stig about this as you and he were switching over. I think a good metaphor here is a traffic jam. You've got a legitimate journey. You get into the car, you want to go to where you want.
You're not in traffic, you are traffic.
You are traffic.
Yeah.
And I think that by the way, I have just recommitted to the Times and Sunday Times not long ago, and I did have I massively believe in a free press. I genuinely feel a sense of tremendous pride as a columnist, kind of like a really trivial part of the output, with the investigative journalism, where we expose the wrongdoing, Farage and Trump. It's incredible what we do. It's so important. But every now and again, I'll just caution, if I may, think about the person at the centre of it, particularly if it's a vulnerable person who's not used to the spotlight, not a politician. Run the story, but take account of the fact you're in a bigger media ecosystem, and maybe one has to recognise that human side of it too.
I mean, I was off for the last fortnight, as listeners will know. I have asked myself what I would have been writing, what I would have been saying had I not been off, whether I get any kind of out, because I happened not to be here writing those words. Who knows?